Let's now look at the exam questions about this lesson 3, chapter 5. The first question is from a winter 2011, paper 11, and it's question 3. It asks for you to sketch on a single diagram the graphs of y equals cosine of 2 theta and y equals 1/2 for theta between 0 and 2 pi. Okay, again, you should always start with the original function, which is the cosine of theta, and apply this transformation, which shrinks the cosine of theta to a half. And you have to basically now have, instead of a full cycle that you would have for the cosine of theta between 0 and 2 pi, you have 2 cycles, right? So that's basically what you have over here. The range is still going to be between -1 and 1, but instead of having just one cycle for the cosine, you would have, instead of having one cycle, yes, like this, you'll have now 2. The the y equals 1/2 is just a straight horizontal line. Write down the number of roots of the equation 2 cosine of 2 theta minus 1 equals 0 in the same interval. When you look at this function, apparently it doesn't have anything to do with the previous question. But it's always worthwhile to take a look and see if it does. And in this case, it does. Okay? Because if you just rearrange this, you'll have on the right-hand side of the equation, you have 1/2. So you are basically equaling cosine of 2 theta to 1/2, which in a situation where you already have the sketch of both is just finding the points of intersection between the two. And how many do you have? You have 1, 2, 3, 4, which correspond to the number of roots. Then for 3, deduce the number of roots of the equation 2 cosine of 2 theta minus 1 equals 0 in the interval 10 pi to 20 pi. Okay? You are not supposed to continue the sketch until you reach the 20 pi, obviously. You are supposed to look at the number of intervals that you have between 0 and 2 pi, which is 4, and extrapolate that for the new interval between 10 pi and 20 pi. Okay? This corresponds to a 10 pi interval, and 10 pi is basically 5 times as big as the 2 pi interval that you start with. So this means that you have 5 times 4 roots, which is 20 roots. Okay? Next question, June 2009, paper 1, question 4. You are given this diagram, which shows the graph of y equals sine of bx plus c for x between 0 and 2 pi, and you have to find the values of a, b, and c. Again, start with the original function, which is the sine of x. And the sine of x between 0 and 2 pi, sine of 0 is 0, sine of pi over 2 is 1, sine of pi is 0, sine of 3 pi over 2 is minus 1. So the original would be something like that. The first thing you should notice is the horizontal stretch. And instead of having a cycle, you have now 2. Right? So the original function has shrunk to half, which means that the value of b is 2. Okay? I've done it here. The value of b is 2. What about the value of a? The value of a is the vertical stretch. Don't forget that now that we have done and dealt with the horizontal transformation, okay? I picked the horizontal. I could have picked the 2 vertical transformations that you have. The 2 vertical being this vertical stretch and this vertical translation. But I picked to deal with the b first, the horizontal transformation, okay? And now for the vertical, I have to deal with the, I have to deal with the stretch first. And the stretch is very simple to figure out. Don't forget, the original function varies between the sine of 2x, now varies between -1 and 1. So you have an amplitude of oscillation, if you will, or the amplitude of the range that you have varies between -1 and 1, which is a 2-unit range. And now what you have a range that varies between -3 and 9, so it is a 12-unit range. So how much bigger is this range as compared to the original one? 12 is 2 times 2, right? Sorry, 12 is 6 times 2. So the vertical stretch A is 6. In order for you to figure out the value of the vertical translation, the best way is for you to look at the point around which, or the y value around which the original function oscillates about. For the y, for the sign of x or 2x is going to be the y equals 0. Again, it oscillates between 1 and -1. And the line through which it oscillates is y equals 0. But now the line through which this new function in us is oscillating is this y equals 3. Okay? So how much has it shifted up? It has shifted up by 3 units, so c is 3. So the final function is 6 sine of 2x plus 3. Find the smallest value of x in the interval 0 to 2 pi for which y equals 0. It is represented here by this point. Y equals 0 in this point, this point, this point, and that one. The smallest one is that one. How much is it? Well, you just have to solve the equation. Okay? Send the 3 to the other side, divide the whole thing by 6, and eventually you have sine of 2x equals -1/2. All right? If you put that in a calculator, and by that I mean the sine -1 of -1/2, you will have this value over here. Don't forget that for the sine, the value that you have in a calculator is not the only one that you have. You will also have the pi minus that. But pi minus this will give a negative number, and you don't have any negative number between 0 and 2 pi, obviously, so I didn't bother to write it down. You don't want the value of 2x, you want the value of x, so you divide the whole thing by 2, and you have here the actual value that this is pointing at. All right? November 2009, paper 12, question 4. The function f is defined by find -3 sine of 2x for x between 0 and pi. Find the range of f. Okay? So again, the same procedure. The sine of x varies between -1 and 1. Okay? So you have to construct the new function that you have and see what this does to the range. In other words, you start with sine of x between -1 and 1. So putting sine of 2x, what does this do? This basically just stretches, in this case compresses, horizontally the sine of x. It doesn't change anything vertically, so the range is still between -1 and 1. Then you have the whole thing multiplied by -3. Here I separated first multiplying by -1 and then multiplying that by 3, so that you can see what this does, multiplying by -1, what it does to the range. If you multiply sine of 2x by -1, what will this do? If the function is like this, it will become instead like this, okay? But the value that was for the sine of 2x, 1, is going to become -1. And the value that was -1 will become 1. It just changes the orientation of the function, but it does nothing in relation to the minimum and the maximum values. So it is still -1 and 1, the range. Now, if you multiply that by 3, okay, then this will become this, okay? So now the value that used to be -1, the minimum value, is going to be -3, and the maximum value is going to be 3. If you then just push the whole thing up by 5 units, the minimum value minus 3 is going to be minus 3 plus 5, which is 2. And the maximum value 3 is going to be 3 plus 5, which is 8. So this is the range, the new range of the constructed function. Sketch the graph. Well, you already know, wrong place. You already know that the sine of x has shrunk. Okay, so instead, between 0 and pi, you would just have, for the sine, you would just have this. Okay, now it has shrunk so that you have a full cycle. Okay, for the sine of x, you have this. Then you multiply the whole thing by minus 3. So this value that used to be 1 is now going to be minus 1 times minus 3 is going to be minus 3. And this value that used to be minus 1 is now going to be 3. So you have now something like this. And finally, you push the whole thing up by 5 units. Sorry, you have now this. Yes, that's what I did. And now you push the whole thing up by 5 units. So the minus 3 is minus 3 plus 5, which is 2. And the 3 is 3 plus 5, which is 8. So you redraw it over there. Okay. Final question. State with a reason whether f has an inverse. A function has an inverse in a given domain if, in that domain, when you draw a horizontal line, it crosses the function only once. And as you can see here, it doesn't. It crosses 2 times, over here 3 times. So if you do an inverse function, you would have a one-many function, which is not a function by definition. So the answer is no, it would not be. It would be a one-many mapping. So that is not a function by definition.